1.8, properties of real numbers. Again, talking about those integers. Commutative property for addition or multiplication. The root word here is commute. Well, commute. And so that means we can go back and forth. We're talking about order here when we're talking about the commutative property. When you leave your house and go somewhere, the grocery store or your job, and you turn around and go back home, you've covered the same amount of distance. That's commuting. And so if I add two things in this order, I can reverse the order. So 2 plus 3 equals 5. And if I reverse the order and say 3 plus 2, that also equals 5. This works for multiplication too. So 2 times 3 equals 6. And I can reverse that order, and my answer is still 6. We're still multiplying the same numbers, so it doesn't matter the order. The associative property, associate, is your root word there, associate, who you hang out with. So while this is about the order, this is about the grouping. And so we can take and add the same numbers on both sides of the equal sign and group them differently, but come up with the same answer. 3 plus 3 is 6. 1 plus 5 is 6. And so our answers are still the same. It works for addition or multiplication. If we have 2 times 3, well, let me do this, times 4, that's going to be the same thing as 2 times 3 times 4. We've got 2 times 12, 24. 6 times 4, 24. We're multiplying the same numbers, just in a different group. And so the associative property. The distributive property is something you're going to use a lot in this class. Looks like this. We've got 3 times x plus 2. We're going to expand it because we're multiplying the 3 times the x and the 3 times the 2. So it will look like 3 times x plus 3 times 2. Or we can write these two next to each other. Plus 3 times 2. That's what it looks like before we finish it out and say it's 3x plus 6. So remember this when you're doing your homework. They're going to ask you to just expand it, not to complete it. The inverse property, if I have a number and then I want to add something to it so that I end up with 0, I want the opposite of this number, and when I add it I'm going to get a 0. Well, the opposite of a 4 is a negative 4, because 4 minus 4 equals 0. And so this is the inverse for addition. The opposite is the opposite sign, inverse. For multiplication, you have to think a little bit harder. We don't want to get 0. We want to get 1. So what can we multiply times 4 to get 1? Remember when we talked about fractions, we said if we had 4 over 4, that would equal 1. Well, whole number 4 is the same thing as 4 over 1. So we'd have to multiply 1 over 4 to get 1. And that's the reciprocal of this number. So 4 times 1/4 will give me 1. This is the reciprocal. That's the inverse. Here it's the opposite number. That's the inverse. With our identity property, we're also going to be talking about 0. Because if I have a number and I add 0 to it, it doesn't change. Just like our identity doesn't change. If we cut our hair, color our hair, gain a little weight, buy some new clothes, our identity is still the same. So 5 plus 0 equals 5. What would I multiply times 5 to keep it as a 5? 1. 5 times 1. And so again, we see the zeros, but in a different, and the ones in a different capacity. Here, the inverse, we are to get to 0. The identity, we use the 0. Here, to get to 1 is our goal for the inverse, and here we use the 1 to keep the identity of the number. 1.8, short little section. Do the homework and try to remember some of the things I said about these, about the grouping, the order. Maybe you'll be able to remember them a little bit better. All right, good luck.